We spend $8 billion a year running over wildlife. When did this become okay? If you took a fraction of that $8 billion, you take a quarter of it, and you invest it in crossing structures, this problem would be solved in a generation. The number one issue facing wildlife today is loss of habitat and habitat fragmentation. One of the reasons that animals move is because they're not able to get exactly what they need where they are. And so when you have these migrations that have survived over millennia, it's because the animals are following that fresh green grass as it's greening up. This pattern of movement is actually what enables them to survive in what are otherwise these incredibly harsh conditions.
The importance of intact habitat for wildlife populations can't be overstated. When we're talking about intact habitat, we're talking about habitats that haven't been unnaturally disturbed due to invasive species, invasive vegetation, impacts from structures that people place on them, housing developments, roads. Anything that makes noise and really disturbs the habitat is going to have a negative impact on wildlife populations. So the more open space, the more open, intact habitat we can have, the better off our wildlife populations, the healthier their populations are going to be in the long run.
An estimated 1 to 2 million large animals are hit every year by motorists on our highway. They result in about 200 human deaths and close to 30,000 injuries. And this is at an annual cost to Americans of over $8 billion.
The safety aspect is huge because I wouldn't want any of my family or friends or anybody else to, have to be put in a situation where, these animals are trying to cross and you end up hitting them. It's just, we need to do better.
What does it look like to fix this problem? What does it look like to build a bridge for animals with the goal that ultimately animals will have essentially their own pathways, their own highway, if you will, for them to get from point A to B where they need to go? In our eyes, Nevada has absolutely been a leader in this area. They have put in crossings for mule deer over US 93. Those crossings have been in for a while now. I know that they've had something like 37,000 successful uses of these crossings, and that basically means that there are 37,000 times that there wasn't a potential to have a driver possibly hitting an animal on that roadway.
We built our very first overpass in Nevada back in 2010, and we were one of the first in North America. Since then, we've added additional 5 for a total of 6 across the state, 5 of which address the mule deer herd that pass through the Pequot Summit Mountain Range.
This particular deer herd, known as the Area 7 mule deer herd in northeast Nevada, makes a migration from the Jarbidge Mountains down into the Pequot Mountains during this migration. And the reason why mule deer need to do this is the snow loads that happen in the Jarbidge Mountains would be too severe and intense for the deer to be able to find forage and make it through the winter. So they are forced to make these long treks down to an area that doesn't receive as much snow so that they can make it through the winter and rear their fawns and have them survive so that they can continue on. There's about 60% of this herd that makes this migration, and we believe that it could be as many as 5,500 deer or so crossing on Highway 93, and then of those, maybe about 4,500 or so that are crossing across the Pequots into the southern part of the Pequots to spend the rest of their winter. Nevada Department of Wildlife has been monitoring deer in northeastern Nevada for many years, and when we came to the table trying to figure out where these crossings should be, we came with a lot of data about the migration and historical movements of these mule deer and where the best place would be for these crossings to be most successful.
We actually looked at a variety of data, including movement data that was provided by the Department of Wildlife, as well as our crash records and our carcass records. And we see where all that data overlaps to see where we're having the highest impact for potential mitigation.
Well, I think as we were inadvertently one of the front runners diving into the construction of overcrossings, there wasn't a lot of research available when we first started. And we were really reaching out to anyone we could just to help us develop, guidance on that. And, how big were these supposed to be? How long? What works?
We ended up seeing what the Canadians did up in Banff with their crossing. I contacted them. They were good enough to send us some basic plans and actually talk about it a little bit. And even at that time, it was new for the Canadians, but they were getting positive feedback and data.
The largest overpass is 200 feet long along the roadway and approximately 600 feet long traversing across the highway. Consistent with the other two crossings on I-80 that are all 200 feet long. The three structures are some of the largest in the United States. The wildlife crossings are fairly simple structures. There's not a lot of complicated elements. We start with the main foundations that will support the entire structure. We follow that with precast arch elements or steel structural elements. Then next we construct the mechanically stabilized earth walls that will support the backfill or soil that then goes over the structure. And generally as the final finishing touches, we put on the fencing and any vegetation that's required. By using precast elements, we can really minimize the impacts to traffic, as opposed to our typical cast-in-place construction that can take months. With the use of precast elements, we can limit that time frame down to just several days, and so it makes a tremendous impact on our schedules, thereby minimizing the impacts to traffic, but also getting these structures constructed in a timely fashion just so they can be beneficial for the migrations and again, any impacts we can make to minimize those vehicular, animal collisions is important, and the faster we can get these built, the better. The East Pequot is probably one of my favorite overpasses that we've constructed just because of the topography and the way we were able to make it blend in. We did have some additional unique features to this one we haven't incorporated in the past, including berms on the structure just to help reduce some of the sound impacts from traffic and reduce some of the visual impacts for the wildlife as they cross.
Some of the innovative things that we were able to accomplish on this project is dealing with some of the fence issues and funneling the animals to the structures. We try to use a 45-degree angle to allow as much of an openness ratio at the entrance of those structures and really funnel those animals to the most successful crossing points. We also utilized fencing at the end of our fencing project where we would pinch the fencing into the roadway, and we think that's really helped in reducing the number of collisions within the project limits.
We are still monitoring deer. We have put GPS tracking devices on over 150 deer since 2008. And so we were able to watch what the deer were doing before the crossings went in and then how they've been using the area since. And it has been a huge success. When the crossings first go in, the deer can get a little bit confused and a little unsure about the fencing. But once they've figured it out, we can watch where deer are almost on a string. They just go right to where the crossing is and use it without any trouble at all.
I do think these structures should be part of an infrastructure growth plan in the future, and we as a department have already, I think, headed that direction. The initial crossings were obviously constructed out on existing roadways, but since that time that we started constructing some of these over 10 years ago, we have included them in roadway expansion projects, and it has become more of a component to our larger construction jobs to consider this up front. part of these wildlife and vehicular interactions, and how do we address that? And I think it has become more important to the department.
When you put these in the right places, you are saving people's lives, you're saving wildlife lives, you're reconnecting these places that we call home that have been severed by roads. And again, properly placed at your highest priority areas, you're saving taxpayer money. Because if you have a stretch that has about 5 or more deer vehicle collisions per mile per year, it actually costs society more to do nothing, just to let those animals die and let those people get injured, than it costs to put in a structure that's going to last 75 years. And poof, you've solved the problem overnight. You're saving people's lives, you're saving wildlife lives, you're reconnecting habitats, you're saving taxpayer money. Done, solved.